Flowers are mainly responsible for bringing about fertilization and seed formation. To facilitate fertilization, it is necessary that the male gametes inside the pollen grains and the female gamete inside the ovule are brought together. However, since the gametes are immotile, pollen grains have to be transferred to the stigma. This process of transfer of pollen to the stigma of a flower, brought about by agents such as insects, wind and water, is called pollination. Pollination can be of two types: self-pollination and cross-pollination. When pollination takes place within the same flower or between flowers of the same plant, it is known as self-pollination. In plants, self-pollination can occur either through autogamy or geitonogamy. In autogamy, pollen is transferred from the anther to the stigma of the same flower. And is seen in cleistogamous flowers or flowers which do not open at all, produced by plants such as viola, oxalis, camelina, and Arachis hypogea or peanut. The anthers and stigma of these flowers lie very close to each other. When anthers dehisce, pollen grains get deposited on the stigma, which ensures the production of seed sets even in the absence of pollinators. Autogamy, however, is rare in chasmogamous flowers, which open and expose their anthers and stigma, as it requires synchrony between pollen release and stigma receptivity. In geitonogamy, the second type of self-pollination, pollen is transferred from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower of the same plant. Apart from self-pollination, cross-pollination is also commonly seen in plants. This type of pollination involves the transfer of pollen grains from the flower of one plant to the stigma of the flower of another plant of the same type. This type of pollination is called xenogamy or allogamy. Interestingly, xenogamy is the only type of pollination that brings genetically different types of pollen grains to the stigma. In both cross-pollination and self-pollination, pollinating agents play a vital role. These agents include biotic agents such as insects, birds, bees, butterflies, and mammals such as bats, as well as abiotic agents such as wind and water. Incidentally, pollination in a majority of plants is aided by biotic pollinating agents, which get attracted by flowers which vary from each other to attract their specific pollinator. Insect-pollinated flowers, for instance, are usually large and fragrant. However, if they are small, they are bunched together in an inflorescence to make them conspicuous. Moreover, these flowers produce pollen grains as well as large quantities of nectar to reward the agents. When a pollinating agent comes in contact with the anther, its body gets covered in a coat of sticky pollen grains. When the agent sits on another flower to suck the nectar, the pollen present on their bodies comes into contact with the stigma, thus completing the process of pollination. Conversely, flowers pollinated by butterflies are usually lightly scented and brightly colored, with nectar not very deeply hidden, while those pollinated by beetles and flies secrete a rotten odor. Flowers pollinated by birds, on the other hand, have large odorless orange or red tubes which are rich in honey.